What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get
to the lane designated in the traffic rules as a lane for route vehicles, in most cases, is prohibited for cars, so you need to understand how not to get into the forbidden zone. First of all, attention should be paid to the sign 5.14, which is so-called lane for route vehicles. It is important because it designates a dedicated lane of the opposite direction. The end of such a lane is indicated by sign 5.14. 1. The next important pair of signs are 5.13. 1 and 5.13. 2. Indicating the presence of a dedicated lane for public transportation on the road, which can be entered at an intersection. Accordingly, motorists are not allowed to turn left or right into the dedicated lane. There are a couple more signs marking the dedicated lane. These are 5.11. 1 and 5.12. 1. They mark the beginning and end of the lane for public transport in the opposite direction. These signs should be paid attention to when planning maneuvers, for example, a U-turn which will be prohibited. Another distinctive feature of a dedicated lane is the horizontal marking 1.23. 1, which is located along the length of the lane and helps drivers to remember its presence. At the same time, the public transport lane may be separated from other lanes in the opposite direction by a continuous strip of marking. 1.1 movement on the lane of public transport is regulated by paragraph 18.2 of the traffic rules. According to it, dedicated lanes may be used by route vehicles, school buses, passenger cabs, buses from the special list approved by the authorities of Moscow, St. Petersburg and Sevastopol, bicyclists if such a lane is located on the right. All other vehicles are prohibited from driving and stopping in the public transportation lane. That is, it is not allowed to move on it, including car-sharing cars, private cab drivers driving without a license, motorcyclists, cyclists, and so on. Lawmakers have long been discussing the possibility of allowing some other categories of drivers to drive on the dedicated lanes. For example, owners of electric cars or those who practice carpooling, car sharing, when the owner gives rides to hitchhikers. However, so far, as of early 2021, all these initiatives remain just talk. Moreover, it should be understood that even school buses and passenger cabs are not always allowed to drive in the public transportation lane. They can enter it only if there is no sign 3.1 entry prohibited, aka brick, at the entrance. In the material devoted to driving under the forbidden signs, we found out that the brick just does not apply to route vehicles, but all others are forbidden to drive under it. Thus, the sign 3.1, installed in addition to the sign 5.14, just allows you to designate the lanes on which you can move only public transport. There is one important exception to the prohibition of dedicated lanes. Sometimes sign 5.14 can be supplemented by information signs 8.5, 2 and 8.5, 3, which specify that the lane is for public transport only on weekdays or, for example, from Monday to Saturday. Thus, on weekends and other days highlighted by the additional information sign, the lane is no longer a dedicated lane and everyone is allowed to use it without exception, just like a regular lane. Sometimes this creates confusion. Signs can appear and disappear, change and so on, and in addition, weekends are also considered. Holidays, but only official ones. So it's worth making sure that it's allowed before taking the public transportation lane. Another exception concerns the exit to the public transportation lane to make a right turn. There is no direct indication of this maneuver in the traffic rules, but, as we remember, paragraph 8.5 of the traffic rules indicates that before turning right, left or U-turn, the driver is obliged to take in advance the corresponding extreme position on the carriageway, intended for movement in this direction. In the detailed material on lane guidance and turns, we found out that you can turn right only from the rightmost to the rightmost lane. Thus, if the markings separating the public transport lane change from solid to dashed before the intersection, you must change to it in advance to make the turn. If the markings remain solid all the way to the intersection, you cannot change to the dedicated lane, and turning right at such an intersection is prohibited. As a rule, the requirements of the markings duplicate the road signs. If the markings are erased or not visible, you should be guided by the road signs. In particular, These may be signs 5.15, 1 and 5.15, 1. Signs 5.15, 1 and 5.15, 2. Indicating the permitted directions of movement in the lanes. As we already told you, as we have already mentioned, compliance with these signs is mandatory, and driving in a direction not permitted by the sign is punishable by a fine. Driving into the lane of public transportation of the opposite direction is punishable under Article 12.17 of the CAO. Part 1.1 specifies that the movement of vehicles in the lane for route vehicles or stopping in the lane in violation of the rules of road traffic and AMP, LT, and AMP, GT, shall entail the imposition of an administrative fine of 1,500 rubles. And Part 1.2 specifies that a violation under Part 1.1 of this article, committed in Moscow or St. Petersburg, shall entail an administrative fine of 3,000 rubles. Another fine can be obtained if you drive into the lane of public transport through a solid line of markings. Such a violation is interpreted under Part 1 of Article 12.16 as failure to comply with the requirements prescribed by road signs or roadway markings, and shall entail a warning or imposition of an administrative fine of 500 rubles. Strange as it may seem, a modern combo device that can read markings and signs can save you from being fined for driving into a public transportation lane. Unfortunately, not every car is able to warn the driver about signs and markings, but now such an assistant is available to any motorist, not only to owners of business class cars. For example, Roadjid has devices with such a function. Installation of Roadjid X9 or Roadjid Premier 3 combo device will help to avoid an accidental fine and get rid of potential communication with the traffic police inspector, if, of course, the violation is noticed by him, and not by the video fixation camera. In addition, these recorders are good because their light-sensitive sensor Sony IMX327 allows you to shoot at night as well as in the daytime. The penalties listed above relate to driving in the lane of public transportation in the oncoming direction. If, however, you enter the oncoming public transportation lane through a solid line of markings, this violation will be punishable by the oncoming traffic standards, that is, when bypassing an obstacle through the solid line, the driver will receive a fine of 1,000 to 1,500 rubles, and when overtaking, a fine of 5,000 rubles or deprivation of rights for a period of 4 to 6 months. Repeated overtaking through the solid line within a year entails deprivation of license for a year when stopped by an inspector, or a fine of 5,000 rubles when the violation is recorded by cameras. In conclusion, understanding the regulations surrounding public transport lanes is crucial for all drivers. These lanes are designated to ensure the efficient movement of buses and other public transport vehicles, and driving in them without proper authorization can lead to significant penalties. Typically, fines can range from a few dozen to several $100s, depending on the jurisdiction. To avoid these consequences, always pay attention to road signs and markings. By respecting public transport lanes, we contribute to a smoother and more efficient transportation system for everyone. Thank you for watching, and drive safely.